Hi, and welcome back to ADK Talks. I'm Jane, and along with my co-host, Steve. Say hi, Steve.
Hello.
We're back bringing you the best of the Adirondacks. Today, we are spotlighting an institution that plays a defining role in the environmental, educational, and economic life of the Adirondack Park, Paul Smith's College. It's the only four-year college located entirely within the Blue Line, with a 14,000-acre campus that serves as a living laboratory for climate resilience, forestry, recreation, hospitality, and natural resource education. And we're honored today to be joined by Dean of Faculty and Professor of Natural Resources, Brett McLeod, to talk about how the college is preparing the next generation of Adirondack-ready professionals, strengthening local communities, and advancing climate adaptation across the region. It's a conversation about education, stewardship, and the future of the Adirondacks, and we're thrilled to share it with you. Brett, welcome to the podcast.
Great. Thanks so much for having me join.
What does it mean to operate a college inside of a 6 million acre park?
Well, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. You know, it's if you think about the Adirondacks in our size, you know, bigger than Yellowstone, Yosemite, Glacier, Grand Teton combined. And the fact that we're actually in proximity to quite a few people, you know, about 5-6 hours from New York City. We're 2 hours from Montreal, 2 hours from Burlington, 2 hours from Albany. And so it really is an opportunity to showcase the Adirondacks and to use this, as you said in the introduction, as our living laboratory. So our students, not surprisingly, while we have a handful of students that come to us from within the Blue Line, most of our students are coming to us from outside the Blue Line, but they know this is a special place. They know this is a place like no other. And because of that, they're driven by the history of the region, the conservation ethic, and the opportunity to become change agents for the next generation of conservationists in the Adirondacks and beyond.
That's great. Can you just give us just a brief history of the college?
Sure. The history of Paul Smith's is interesting because it's intertwined with the economy and the natural resources. Originally, Paul Smith's College was settled and established on the land of the Haudenosaunee. And the lake that people refer to today as Lower St. Regis Lake was originally known as Akwesasne Lake, and we also refer to it here as the college as Akwesasne Lake. When Paul Smith established his resort here in the 1850s, it was really about bringing the wilderness experience to people from the cities. And rail access to the interior of the Adirondacks really was the game changer. The story of the hotel is the story of many hotels. It thrived throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. Paul Smith's Hotel and Resort was had the distinct pleasure of hosting 3 presidents and numerous guests from all over the world. It was the place to be in the summertime. And as for many great camps and resorts of the Adirondacks, the Depression took its toll. So in the 1930s, much of the resort was in disrepair, and there was a fire. And it was that fire that was sort of the beginning of the end of the hotel and resort, but it was the beginning of the Paul Smith's College story. So Phelps Smith, the son of Paul Smith, the original hotelier, was the one who ultimately decided that this should be a college. And so the holdings of Paul Smith, including the railroad company, the power company, all the various enterprises that Paul Smith had, laid the foundation for starting a college. And Phelps Smith looked at all the industries that made his family successful, and he said, those are going to be the industries that we focus on. So that included, for example, forestry. So the forests were this incredible natural resource that was needed to construct the hotel and resort, but it was also the reason that people came to the region as well for the natural beauty. And there's quite a few stories about Paul, pointing out individual trees from across the lake and saying, don't cut those large pines, for example, because it wasn't just about the economic value, it was also about the intrinsic value. And he knew that's what drove people here. Other industries that were really important at this time included hotel and resort management. So that was one of our early majors as well. How do you actually run a mountain resort and provide for your clients and build a sustainable business model? And so that was our second original major. And then third was liberal arts. So really building on the needs of the region. Over time, it evolved into culinary and baking were added. Again, true to the roots of the college, and also the expansion of environmental programs into biology, ecological restoration, and a variety of other related natural resource disciplines.
Being a 14,000 plus acre campus, how do you feel that that really shapes the student experience? I mean, that's a huge, it's maybe not the largest college campus, but it's one of the biggest campuses in, the U.S.
Yeah, so our acre to student ratio comes out to about 20 to 1. So every student gets 20 of their own acres. And so it really is, it is the bedrock of what makes a Paul Smith's education different, right? So we don't, when we have a lab, we mean the field. So we're not, we take the students out literally our back door and march into the woods, often on snowshoes or skis. And that's where we have our classes. And so to be able to skip the bus and skip the slideshow and really just see that merger of theory and practice and witness it in front of you live, there's nothing quite like that. And so that's really what makes Paul Smith's unique. And we know that that is what is our differentiator from other colleges. So it's something that we double down on and will continue to double down on in the future.
Is there a typical Paul Smith student, or is there, what kind of folks are really attracted to the school?
The one thing I hear from students all the time is that, boy, geez, in high school, I just really didn't feel like that was the place for me. I wasn't into it. I was just sort of going through the motions, trying to get by. And then they discover Paul Smith's. And they're like, these are my people. This is my tribe. This is my place. And so it's not uncommon to see students who just sort of muddled through high school come to Paul Smith's and absolutely thrive. And I'm also an alumnus, and so I have that same experience of really being put in the right place, surrounded by the right people and the right environment. And that can make a huge difference and really inspire our students to go on to pretty amazing careers.
How do you think that experience is really helping your students prepare for the real world challenges that are happening in the Adirondacks, whether it's climate related, economy? How do you feel like you're preparing the next generation?
Yeah, so, our students, of course, have the leg up when they apply for a job that is an Adirondack-based job because they know the communities, they know the people, they understand the socio-political context in which the park operates, and all of that's really important background information and context for living and working here. And I would say the other thing is that our community here is just so intertwined, that we talk about the college of the Adirondacks, but the reality is we are the college for the Adirondacks. And so we recognize that there's this interdependence between the communities and Paul Smith's, and whether that's folks, coming to the Vic for a cultural or experience, or taking a class to bone up on a particular topic they're curious about, or convening experts around a particular topic. That's really the role that Paul Smith's plays. And, so many of our students will be in a class where we'll have a guest speaker, and then they'll tell me at the end of the semester, oh, by the way, I got an internship or a job with so-and-so who was our class speaker. So that's a fairly common path as well.
That's great. You just mentioned the VIC, your Visitor Interpretive Center. Can you explain a little bit about what that is for our listeners?
The history of the VIC is interesting. It goes back to the 1980s and the Adirondack Park Agency. And of course, the Adirondack Park Agency created in 1971, and it was sort of a first stab at zoning within the park. So we had a 6 million acre park, but there were no rules governing development on private land. And so the park agency was established to deal with questions around development, how much and where, and sensitive ecosystems and that sort of thing. And it created a bit of a culture war within the Adirondacks. And it felt like Albany imposing their views of what development should and shouldn't be on the Adirondack region. And so I think it was really an olive branch, the creation of the Visitor Interpretive Center by the Adirondack Park Agency to say, hey, we want to be part and parcel of this story. We want to strike that balance between preservation and development. And one of the ways they did that was through the Visitor Interpretive Center, which was meant to tell the Adirondack story to visitors, but also to be a resource for local communities as well. And so hiking trails and ski trails and interpretive displays and all the rest was part of the original Visitor Interpretive Center mission.
Yeah, it's a great resource, and the programming that is offered there is incredible, and it's right adjacent or on Paul Smith's campus, right?
Yeah, so it's on Paul Smith's land, and so that's the sort of the part two of the story. So the park agency ran this up until the early 2000s, and then due to budget cuts, the state pulled out. And so here we had this amazing facility. It was on our land and is, incredibly costly to operate, but we recognize the value to the community. So Paul Smith stepped up and took over running the Visitor Interpretive Center. It continues to be open to the public, and we're dependent upon philanthropic support from the folks who use the property and really value its place in the community. It also serves as a training center for our Nordic sports team. So we have a active Nordic sports here at Paul Smith's, including a biathlon team that practices at an on-site biathlon range that's part of the VIC. You'll see our trail groomers out there. We host competitions where colleges from all throughout the Northeast and Canada compete alongside us. So it's really a fabulous resource and in many ways is the welcome center to Paul Smith. So we certainly encourage folks to come and experience the VIC.
That's great.
Brett, you've really given us a great introduction to Paul Smith. If someone were interested to find out more online, perhaps you could share the URL or where they could come across some more of this information.
Sure. Yeah. If folks want to learn more about Paul Smith's College, paulsmiths.edu is the place to go. And that includes a link to our admissions department. And really, we always tell folks who think that Paul Smith's might be the right home for them to come visit us. It's really a place that must be experienced. We have, great photography on the website, but until you've, wet your paddle and muddied your boots here on campus, you really haven't had the full Smitty experience. And we take a lot of pride in giving prospective students a chance to understand what it's like to become a Smitty.
Yeah, it's a beautiful campus.
It is.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about a topic that is very much on the mind, I think, of anyone who loves the Adirondacks is climate challenges and climate change and climate resiliency. What do you see as the most pressing issues facing the Adirondacks, and how is Paul Smith's helping students and communities prepare to meet those challenges?
Yeah, great question. Climate change is a complicated question, and the pieces are all hitched together. So as, of course, economic dimensions and social dimensions and ecological dimensions that many times we find are strung together in ways that bring a lot of complexity to the questions at hand. And so that's a lot of what we're doing with our students. We're digging into these complex questions. And as I think about our role and Paul Smith's role specifically in this, we're helping the state deliver on the climate action plan. A huge component of that climate action plan is is being able to justify a place like the Adirondacks from an economic sense. How do we strike that balance as being a park where people actually live, play, and work? And so we generate about $65 million in annual economic impact. And that's a huge part of it because that economic impact is, of course, based in our mission. It's the research that we do around climate change. It's the education we provide for our students. It's the ongoing outreach and public education that we provide. So really just wanted to put a point on the fact that this is an economic question in addition to an ecological question. We're also a little different. We're able to contribute to the climate change story in kind of unique ways. So while if folks remember back to the 1980s and 90s, many of the Adirondack lakes ultimately went dead as a result of acid rain. That acid rain was a function of coal-fired power plants throughout the Midwest, and changes in regulation ultimately meant that many of those power plants were shut down and other energy sources were pursued. That has meant that many of these lakes have bounced back. And so that's the wonderful news. And Paul Smith has been part of that story and helping many of these lakes to recover. One particularly fun story I have for you is a few years ago, we got a call from the Department of Environmental Conservation, and they were interested in restoring a remote lake that had once had a very healthy brook trout population. And they said, the problem is the pH is just too low and it's not recovering fast enough. But we think we can speed things up a bit through if we were able to lime the lake. So using lime to raise the pH of the lake and make it more suitable for brook trout. And they said the problem, though, is that the lake is so remote that we can't get in there with our equipment, and even if we could, it would be illegal because it's part of the forest preserve where motorized equipment isn't allowed. So their options were essentially to use a helicopter and try and drop lime into it, which was cost prohibitive, or to call Paul Smith's College and say, hey, could you get your draft horses out here and use your draft horses to help us lime this particular lake with 20 tons. So 20 tons of pelletized lime. And we brought our draft horses in and our students in our draft horse management class, and they hauled all that lime out onto the lake in the wintertime when it was frozen. And then in the spring, when everything melted, the lime dissolved into the lake. And I have to tell you, this last summer, I went back to that lake and had the most fabulous fishing experience ever. So that's the reason I haven't mentioned the lake yet in this story. But
I think I remember an Adirondack Life article about that quite a few years ago.
Yeah. So
the whole process, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's great, and we do that sort of thing all the time. So we work with DEC quite a bit when they're working in areas that are designated as forest preserve or wilderness, and we'll use our horses to bring in bridge stringers, for example, for backcountry bridges to get across waterways and that sort of thing. And really, draft horses have a great application, and part of the reason we teach our students about this is not just if they go on to work in the Adirondacks, but also if they end up going out west. So if you go to wilderness areas that are part of a Park Service or Forest Service lands, you again can't have motorized equipment in there. So whether it's packing mules with firefighting equipment or bringing in materials to the backcountry, draft power is one of those really important niche skills that we actually teach here at Paul Smith's.
That's fascinating.
That falls under the ecological restoration program, I would assume, to a certain extent, as well as just
It does, yeah. I mean, it's one of the things we have here is a very interdisciplinary faculty and curriculum. So we don't actually even have departments. All of our faculty work together under sort of one heading and collaborate in a way that's a lot of fun. And so the horses get used in low impact logging in our forestry program, or maybe get used for ecological restoration, or by our tourism students for giving sleigh rides or carriage rides.
Tell me a little bit about the student body. How many students and where do they come from? And also the faculty too.
Our students number about 600, and they come from all over the country. The highest percentage, not surprisingly, is from the Northeast, but we also tend to attract students from what I'll call rural lifestyle locations. So we always have a handful of students that come from Alaska, for example, that want to go to the lower 48, but still want that mountain life, and so that's always popular. With our students. We also have a master's program that's a hybrid, and about 90% of it's delivered online, and then the other 10% is delivered through residencies here at the college in the summertime. And for those students, they can be even further flung. We have international students in that program as well. And, the Adirondacks is really just sort of an interesting model of conservation that's applicable, far outside the region and in other countries too. It's unique because we have a park where people actually live inside of it. And so it suggests a different approach to conservation and one that attempts to balance that social dimension with the ecological dimensions.
When folks graduate or as they're studying in those 4 years, what are some of the major career paths? You've mentioned some of them already, but what do Paul Smith graduates tend to go on to do?
Yeah, well, so the first thing I would note about our graduates is that they fall in love with the area. And so 1 in 4 of our graduates stays in the North Country after they graduate. And I think that's a pretty impressive statistic. So if you're walking around town, it's not surprising to run into a Smitty. They came to Paul Smith's, they fell in love with it, and they stayed. And so I think that's an important point of this, that this place gets into your heart. And for many people, they then become part of the fabric of this community for the rest of their lives. And, true to Paul Smith's vision and Phelps Smith's vision of having a college that serves the region, we find that they go into careers in the Adirondacks that are reflected here. So our top 3 majors are natural resource conservation and management, fish and wildlife, and forestry. And so within those 3 majors, you'll find about half of our students. And so they are pursuing employment with many times the state of New York through the Department of Environmental Conservation, but there's also some really novel employment opportunities within the region as well. So we have forestry students that have been actually hired by a Danish pension fund because the Danes invest in forests in the U.S. and in the Adirondacks, and those forests need to be managed to give a return on investment for that pension. So something you'd never think of, and just a good reminder of how this really is a globalized world that we live in.
Hey, Brett, could you explain a little bit more about what forestry is? Because I think people see this big word and they say forestry.
I get a lot of questions about what forestry is, and to understand forestry, I think the starting point is really to acknowledge that it was and is a science that was born out of scarcity. And so we don't see forestry emerge in the United States until the late 1800s, early 1900s as a profession. And prior to that, it had existed in Europe for several hundred years in one form or another, because there was just high population pressure on natural resources. And so they learned to cultivate trees. They learned to manage for different products, different species, integrate game management as part of forest management. All of that was part of the early story of forestry in Europe. In the United States, it was in recognition of the exploitation of natural resources and really the realization that our forests were not limitless. I wrote a book a few years ago called American Axe, the Tool That Shaped a Continent. And in that book, I do a little bit of math and come up with a number of about 500 million acres that were cut in the United States, some of it twice over, with axes and crosscut saws. So all pre-chainsaws, pre-feller bunchers, any of that mechanized equipment, half a billion acres. So an incredible number. And that really drove the need for having forestry. So the art and science of tending a forest is sort of the heart of forestry. That's silviculture. And we tend for all sorts of reasons. So whatever the landowner's goals and objectives are, if it's to have an area that sequesters carbon, we can do that. If it's an area that's meant to promote wildlife, we can do that. If it's meant to produce timber, we can do that. And so that's really what the job of a forester is, to work alongside nature and mimic natural processes to encourage whatever outcomes we might want for that forest someday. But one of the things you'll find about foresters is they tend to have a very long view on the world, because most of our work is happening over the span of 80 to 100 years when we're talking about forestry in the Adirondacks, and very slow growth and all the rest.
That's so fascinating. I mean, you must have to be incredibly patient, to know that the fruits of your labors may not be seen for 50, 60, 70 years. You may not even be there to see them, not to put too dark a spin on it, but that's really kind of interesting. Beyond this example of the Danish company and partnerships with the state, are there other institutions, employers, companies that Paul Smith is partnering with?
There's quite a few companies and other institutions that we partner with. One of the recent changes at Paul Smith's has been the launch of several new institutes. And these institutes are really meant to be outward facing. So we have an Institute of Adventure, Hospitality, and Food, for example, that focuses on local food systems and on nature-based tourism. And so we've partnered with a variety of providers, and that's everything from individual guides to large hotels that are looking to give maybe a more boutique type of experience to guests. And then really focusing on our culinary and baking programs and thinking about it through the lens of artisans. So there's really only one way you build an artisan, and that's through repetition. And so when it's not by making a loaf of bread 5 times, it's by making it 500 times, right? And so our students, for example, run a bakery here on campus that's open to the public, and they learn through repetition how to become artists in their craft. And so many of these students have gone on to work in local businesses. We also have guest chefs that come in from local businesses. We have student internship and pipeline programs where students will move through a particular major, and they know at the end of that they're going to work for such and such a company.
That's really interesting. I always think it's the mix of the hospitality part of Paul Smith, while it's linked very closely with the heritage of the property and the history and who Paul Smith was and the hotel that was there. All the forestry stuff seems very on brand. And then it's like, oh yeah. And then we do hospitality and baking. It's kind of not something, it's a little bit unexpected.
Sure. Yeah. We of course hear that a lot. And once you know the story of Paul Smith's and why we have the combination, it makes perfect sense. But until then, it seems like, not the most obvious of matches.
The school recently rebranded to sort of not to put too much of a marketing spin on it, but the tagline, the College of the Adirondacks. What really inspired that?
Yeah. So, I think we've been known as the College of the Adirondacks for quite a while, but, we want to remind folks that we're here, that we're ingrained in the fabric of the community. And that's why, we say that we're not just the College of the Adirondacks, but we're also the College for the Adirondacks. And it's certainly an important part of our brand, just as we talk about our students having, sharp minds and calloused hands. That's the other part of our brand here, is that we're not a school that's entirely about research and theory. We're about doing. We're about problem solving. Earlier, you were asking, what are our faculty like? And I think about our faculty, and I think the best word I can come up with to describe our faculty is that they're not sort of pure traditional academics, although we have plenty of those as well. Most of them fall into the category of what I like to call pracademics. So they're practically oriented. Many of them have worked in industry before they came to Paul Smith's, and then have made a switch later on in their careers to teaching. And it brings an amazing perspective and depth of experience that really can't be replicated any other way.
Yeah, it breaks the adage of those that can't teach. It sounds like the people that teach at Paul Smith's really do too.
Exactly.
So that's great. Right. That's awesome. What do you think the next decade looks like for Paul Smith's?
I think the next decade is really exciting for Paul Smiths. If you look around and you look at the challenges that higher ed is facing, Paul Smith stands out as a place that is really different, right? So I talk to colleagues who are really struggling with artificial intelligence, AI, right? And if you can just have your AI chat buddy write your term paper or whatever, it really has kind of turned higher ed on its head. But, for our students, we're in many AI-proof careers, or as close as we can get to AI-proof careers. And so they're, out in the field, many times using technology, but you still need a person there. You still have to actually walk the ground. You have to verify boundary lines, not just look at it on a map. We're not to the point that technology is able to produce, they may be able to produce roles, but can they produce an artisan baker? Probably not, right? So that human touch, the things that just can't be replicated other ways, is really our sweet spot at Paul Smith's. And so that's why I say, we've always done it, but we're doubling down on it. I think that's an important part of navigating the future. We're also looking at the way people learn. We're moving in a direction that recognizes that many people want short courses. They want certificates. They want to do things that are not 2, 4, or 6 years long, and instead give them a particular skill and give it to them in short time. So we're focusing on that. And then also looking at the population that we serve. And, our veterans community is incredibly important to us here. Paul Smith's College, while we were chartered in the 1930s, we didn't actually get rolling until right after World War II. The campus itself was used as a Signal Corps training center during the Second World War. But then many of those veterans stayed on afterwards and earned their degree in the early years at Paul Smith's. And the same thing held true after the Korean War and Vietnam War and more recent conflicts as well. And so we have a veterans community that we're really committed to serving. And one of the ways we do that is through another one of our new strategic initiatives. It's called Battlefish Academy. And Battlefish Academy is a lot of fun. It's a guide-led program that has a whole host of veterans that teach in it. And what they're doing is they're teaching the next generation of outdoor guides. And we focused on veterans because there's a healing and therapeutic dimension to being outside, working as a guide. And we discovered that, our vets never complain about the weather. They're tough. They can navigate through the forest just fine. And we're really trying to give them amazing careers that are connected to the region, address the regional shortage of guides, and get them an important credential. So we have, as an example, a certificate that is in guiding, but it's also dovetails with our business program because, we can train anyone to be a guide in a few weeks, but we want you to be able to do this as a career for the rest of your life. And so they actually earn a small business certificate alongside their guide training while they're here at Paul Smith's. And we have cohorts that move through 3 times a year. And it's all veterans, so they're surrounded with other people who've had similar experiences and have the same dream of becoming an outdoor guide.
Yeah, we had a guide on earlier this year, and on the podcast, Matt Burnett, and it's so interesting if you go to the Adirondack Experience, if you go to some of these places and you see the history of an Adirondack guide, that it's still very much an important profession here in the Adirondacks, and how that can really transform the experience you have here by having someone take you to those remote places like your favorite fishing hole now, or places that you may not otherwise know about, or you're not going to read about it on All Trails or someplace like that. So it's very cool. How is the college, thinking about sustainability and how they contribute to that, whether it's academically or environmentally or institutionally?
Sustainability is a thread that runs through everything that we do here at Paul Smith's. And, whether that's in our culinary program, an effort we've undertaken to source local products to minimize the carbon footprint, It's in forestry. It's the bedrock of forestry. So maintaining complex ecological systems that also still provide for the needs of people. It's in our institutes. Our Adirondack Watershed Institute is one of the premier institutes in the region that focuses on water quality, invasive species control, and stewardship. In fact, we hire over 100 stewards, most of them Paul Smith students, every summer to patrol lakes and make sure that invasives stay out of our waterways. And so it's who we are. It's before sustainability was a buzzword. It was what we were doing, and it's what we'll continue to do moving forward.
Can you give examples? For a lot of our listeners are from New York City. What's an invasive what are types of invasive species that we're battling in the Adirondacks?
Sure. Yeah. So invasive species, they tend to be non-native to the area. And then once they get a foothold, they're able to outcompete the native species. And so that means that an area where you might have had a lot of species diversity, and that diversity would be serving lots of different roles within that ecosystem. Now, all of a sudden, you end up with a monoculture, a single species, or maybe just a couple of species that dominate and reduce the complexity of that environment. And the reality is that it may create great habitat for something else, right? So there's winners and losers in all of these. But on the whole, when we reduce ecosystem complexity, we are reducing its resiliency. And resiliency is sort of the key to navigating climate change. It's having multiple pathways for the environment to respond to different natural disasters, to increases in precipitation or temperature or anything else. And so that's why invasive species control is so important. And it falls into a couple of buckets. One is aquatic invasive species control, and that's largely the work that the Adirondack Watershed Institute is focused on, and the stewards at the boat launches. But we've also expanded our work into terrestrial invasive species control as well. And that, of course, cuts across our forestry curriculum. We're seeing species that we've watched, invasive species, that is, that we've watched for a decade or more, finally moving into the Adirondack region, knowing that it was just a matter of time. And the good news is that's given us some time to develop strategies. So whether they're quarantine strategies or inoculation of individual trees or plants or whatever, we have a few tools in our toolbox that allow us to address some of those challenges. But the reality is that it's very difficult to control invasive species. Once they're out of the box, they're out of the box. And so when folks come to the Adirondacks and they see, for example, that they can't bring their own firewood with them, they should recognize the reason why. It's because, those species have moved into the region. Many times they're insect species that have traveled along under the bark of firewood, and then the firewood doesn't all get burned, and then the next thing you know, it's established in that campground or forest. And so that's just one example of sort of the role that we all play in helping to control invasives. But it's an important part of the work that we do here at Paul Smith College.
You're doing so much important work at Paul Smith, and we mentioned your website earlier. How can our listeners learn more about how they can support Paul Smith?
Sure.
Or what are some of the ways that they could support Paul Smith?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about the Paul Smith community and all the people who love Paul Smiths is that people support in such different and interesting ways. We have folks who come back and, donate their time and their talent as guest speakers in the classroom. We have a fabulous relationship with our other lakeshore owners that share our chain of lakes here, and they provide philanthropic support. They also provide support to our institutes for research and education. And really, so all of that together means that we can be a more vibrant community. And we're always looking to expand our network of support, people who believe in our mission, that understand that places like Paul Smith's aren't just nice to have, but they're essential to the region and to the region thriving in the future. And so we certainly value that, and thank everyone who is a supporter of Paul Smith's and invite those who aren't to become.
That's amazing. I feel like, we've been talking now for almost 45 minutes, and I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface of Paul Smith's. So I hope that we can have you back or somebody else back to give us an update in the future, because you're just doing so much important work there. It's incredible. Brett, this has just been a great conversation. And before we let you loose into the wild again, we like to end every episode by asking our guests to share their favorite place in the Adirondacks or
Favorite fishing hole.
Yeah, your fishing hole. Or your thing to do in the Adirondacks. I didn't ask if you are from this area originally or how you got here. But maybe you can tell us maybe your favorite trail or paddle, or it might be your favorite place to get an ice cream cone in the summer.
Well, there's so many beautiful places in the Adirondacks to explore, but I'm really fortunate that, when I'm here on campus and I look out over lower St. Regis Lake, in the background is St. Regis Mountain. And St. Regis Mountain is really an absolute gem. And so as I look up at the mountain today, it's all covered in snow, but I can see at the very top is a tower, and that's one of the original Adirondack fire towers that was used in the early 1900s to watch for forest fires and control them before they got out of hand. And a few alumni from Paul Smith's got together several years ago and led an initiative to restore fire towers across the Adirondacks that were at risk of being removed because they're a safety danger or no longer part of the forest preserve. And they've done a fabulous job of saving this part of our history. And so I always tell folks, you should go up St. Regis Mountain, hike to the top, and then when you're on the summit, just keep going right up that fire tower. They've done a great job restoring it. It's now fully accessible and offers amazing views of the chain of St. Regis Lakes.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. St. Regis Fire Tower. We haven't heard that one before. So that's great. Thanks again so much for spending time with us. This has just been so fascinating, the history of Paul Smith's, and to hear all the amazing things the faculty and students are doing and the contribution it's making and the impact it's having on the Adirondacks. It's really a tremendous story. And I encourage our listeners, if they found this interesting, definitely visit Paul Smith's website and learn more, or take a trip up to the Visitor Interpretive Center. It's open all year round. As Brett mentioned, it's a great place for hiking on the trails or cross-country skiing, and there's a lot of special events that go on there as well. So, Brett, thanks again, and thank you for sharing the Paul Smith story with us.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me and allowing me to share the Adirondacks and the Paul Smith story.
That's great. Have a great day. Well, Steve, that was another great episode. I know we say this at the end of every episode, like, patting ourselves on the back for how fascinating we are. But I thought that was a really...
It's not us.
It's not us. It's our guests. And we are so lucky to have so many interesting and fascinating stories to tell in the Adirondacks. We are... As I look out my window right now, we got about 3 or 4 inches of snow last night and yesterday.
Oh, did you?
Yep. So even though by the calendar it's not winter yet, it's definitely feels like winter here. And, Whiteface is open for skiing on the weekends now. So is Gore. And I think, sort of in the central Adirondacks, lots of places got much more snow yesterday than we did, 8-10 inches. So this season has definitely begun.
Today is the first day of meteorological winter.
What is meteorological winter?
It's December, January, and February.
That's an Acker fact I think you just dropped on us, Steve. I did not know that.
Well, there you go.
Listener, one thing we do want to mention is over this past weekend, one of our favorite spots in the Adirondack, Sticks and Stones Pizzeria in Scroon Lake, had a devastating fire. And so our hearts go out to the owners and certainly We are wishing a speedy recovery for them from that. It was a beautiful wooden log. What's the word I'm looking for? Almost like a log cabin style. Timber framed. Yeah.
It was they did a beautiful job in building it. Unfortunately, when you have a building that's got so much of it is timber construction like that, if it starts to go, it can go very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just completely wiped out.
So we are sending out our good thoughts and hopes that they are able to recover that from that fire quickly.
Yes.
I think that's about it for today. Anything, Steve, you want to share before we sign off?
Subject matter of Paul Smith College is really, could have expanded on it immensely. I hope we get back to it again. And one of the things that I don't think we even discussed is just the beauty of the campus. I know we discussed it, but just how impressive it is to drive in there. And if you're, it's one of those places where if you happen to be on your way to someplace in the Adirondacks and you go by the Visitor Interpretive Center is unique and interesting all on its own, but just to drive into that campus and say you wanted to take a walk around it, it's definitely worth investigating. It's something I don't think people would even consider an option when they're planning a trip.
Stephen, it might help too for our listeners if we kind of
tell them where it is.
Tell them where it is exactly.
It's like, everyone knows exactly where it is.
It's kind of, if you think of what we call the Tri-Lakes area, Lake Placid, Saranac Lake, and Tupper Lake, it's north of Saranac Lake. So it is a remote part of the Adirondacks. It's not, you're not going to take Amtrak there. But it is very beautiful. So if you're in the Saranac Lake, Lake Placid area, it's worth a drive over there to see it. And we frequently feature some of the events that take place there on our website in our events section. So, and they have their own events calendar too. So it's definitely worth a drive and seeing what's going on there. In the summer, they actually have a butterfly house too, which is really cool. That's at the Visitor Interpretive Center at the Vic. So it's cool. All right, listener, thanks again for spending 45 minutes with us. We encourage you to check out our website, adktaste.com, for all the latest news and information and insights about the best of the Adirondacks. While you're there, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which will deliver those insights right into your inbox every week. And if you liked what you heard today, we encourage you to subscribe, rate, and review us. It helps other people discover the best of the Adirondacks as well. And until next time, we hope you are enjoying the Adirondacks and experiencing all of its wonders.
Pray for snow.
Yeah, I don't know about praying for snow. I mean, I want it to snow, but I also don't want to be snowbound this winter. So, all right, that's enough from us. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.